The roundtable is here. ABC's political analyst Matthew Dowd, ABC's Cokie Roberts, syndicated radio host Laura Ingraham, and Elsie Granderson from ESPN and CNN. So let's start with the straw poll. Let's look at the actual results, the top 5 vote getters we have here. Of course, Rand Paul on top, not a surprise, 3 years in a row. Walker very close second. Jeb Bush coming in 5th. Matthew, we know that the straw poll doesn't mean that much. Otherwise, we would have had President's Paul for a long time. But was this a breakthrough moment again for Scott Walker?
I don't know if it's a breakthrough moment for Scott Walker. I think what it shows is the momentum right now behind Scott Walker. He's given basically 2 speeches in the course of his presidential nomination race, and he's now surged to the lead in Iowa. He's either tied or in the lead in New Hampshire. He's either tied nationally. And so I think it's a continued momentum for him. I think one of the interesting things about this is that, to me, this shows the desire of the Republican Party to nominate somebody that's not necessarily, quote-unquote, the establishment figure. I think that really existed in 2012, but there was nobody that could take it away from Mitt Romney. They want somebody outside of Washington.
But Scott Walker has won in 2 very conservative venues. And the truth is that everything he says makes it worse for him. And that business of I've stood up to public employees unions and I can stand up to ISIS.
Actually, I would argue that it makes it better for him in the Republican primary.
In the Republican primary, perhaps. But I think that it makes it worse for him in terms of the media primary, the money primary, and at a general election.
Well, what about that comment? I mean, he didn't compare ISIS to the protesters. That's not what he did. But he did say, because I stood up to them, I could stand up to them.
It was an offhand comment. Ronald Reagan in 1980, I think it was right before the New Hampshire primary, made a similar comment. He said, after dealing with Jack Warner of the Warner Brothers Studios, the Russians can't be any tougher. That was kind of Reagan's sense of humor. And, of course, the same people who are caterwauling about Scott, oh, how could you say this? He was making an offhand comment. I think this is the way CPAC is always seen through the media lens. I'm not saying it's all that definitive. We know it's not for picking things. But it is, I think Matthew's right. It's taking a bit of a pulse of where the grassroots are, a little bit more libertarian still at CPAC. But it was interesting. Jeb Bush had to bus in people. The New York Times did an amazing report on this about how he had to get lobbyists from K Street. The buses actually left from K Street. I wouldn't have wanted that if I were them. Actually physically organized people left from K Street and bus people into CPAC. Now, I think it's really smart. The Bushes, you know, they're not playing JV here. They're playing varsity. And it's really, really smart for him to do. Let me just finish. So I think Jeb showed up, and I think, you know, he did. I think he acquitted himself very well. But the problem is the grassroots doesn't like him. And he can bust in as many people as he wants. He'll get the donors. He'll get big money donors down in Florida, in Beverly Hills, Palo Alto.
But you've got
That's
to
the real game here.
Go
I was
ahead.
going to say, I think the sweet sound of him being booed at CPAC was music to the ears of independents.
Right.
Because the further he looks...
We're not in the general yet. That's the
We're
problem.
not in the general, but at least he doesn't look that crazy. And if he doesn't look that crazy, that means everyone else gets to look and go, oh, well, maybe what he says actually makes sense because they don't like
That's
him.
why I said he actually acquitted himself well at CPAC, but I was trying to make a
Mitt
more subtle
Romney
point.
did himself in, and he did himself in at organizations like this because he kept pandering and saying what he thought conservatives thought he should say. And so it was not his opponents who did him in, it was himself. Jeb Bush managed to avoid that trap. Now, I think the person who won at CPAC was John Kasich. He didn't show up. And I think that's the wisest thing for anybody to do.
Well, and I think Cokie's right. I think there's still a great opportunity for somebody else to get into this race, whether it's John Kasich or Mike Pence. I still bet on some Great Lakes governor winning the Republican nomination. But let me postulate something about this forum in this. What would happen if a candidate showed up that had liberalized abortion laws, that had the largest tax increase in history, that had given weapons to Iran, that had tripled the national debt, that had given amnesty to 3 million immigrants?
Stop talking about Ronald Reagan now.
Bingo. What would happen if Ronald Reagan, with that record, had shown up at this conference? He would have been booed.
Absolutely.
He would have gone to the conference.
But this is a different Republican Party.
It's very different.
Okay,
That's the concern.
So Ronald Reagan would be booed at today's CPAC. First of all, that's ridiculous. As we know,
With that record,
the Simpson-Mazzoli bill dealt with 3 million people, and with the promise of enforcement.
This is the amnesty bill.
Yeah,
1986.
Who knows what Reagan would say today about where we are?
They didn't even want to hear about reform, let alone any amnesty conversation.
The idea that Reagan would be applauding the fact that we have 18 million people, or whatever number we're using today, of people who are here illegally, he would be probably horrified.
The main thing Ronald Reagan was a great pragmatist, and he
that's not what you guys guys were saying about Reagan about how many.
Can we bring it back to present day? I just want to ask you directly,
But he would have understood
Laura,
that these people are here and are going to be voting.
Right. But Laura, does Jeb Bush deserve credit for going into the lion's den as he did and sticking to his guns?
Sure.
Well, you disagree with him vehemently on immigration.
On some issues, I think.
But he didn't pander. Yeah. He went there and
I think Jeb. I mean, I think he did. He was a really good governor of Florida. I think that was then. This is now. A lot of things have changed since then. He's been out of the game for a long time, but he has an amazing network of big donors, organizational skills, and he actually is, he knows how to work a room like that. I think in that setting, he did about as well as you could do, but he did have to bring in people and bust them in. Now, I'm just saying that's what he had to do. It would have been interesting to see how we would have handled it if he didn't bust in the people.
To me, Jeb Bush does not fit the time. Jeb Bush is too old. It's too long ago. The wrong last name. To me, if I were Hillary Clinton, I would want to run against Jeb Bush.
Absolutely.
Because I would want to say Clinton legacy, Bush legacy. Let's vote on it. That's the problem with Jeb Bush.
Well, I wouldn't go with the too old thing and then mention Hillary Clinton in the same sentence, though.
I think the same thing of Hillary Clinton.
But I've got to tell you, you talk to the Clinton folks, the candidate they worry about most is Jeb Bush.
Oh.
But let's turn to Hillary Clinton. Very interesting moment this week when Elizabeth Warren was asked directly about Hillary and offered an interesting response.
I want to hear what she wants to run on and what she says she wants to do. That's what campaigns are supposed to be about.
She was asked directly, do you think that Hillary Clinton can be that warrior to the middle class we need? And she didn't answer yes. She said, well, I don't know. That's what primaries are about.
She's clearly not on board with Hillary Clinton, and even though she has given some lip service to that. And I think the election in Chicago has now probably
Rahm Emanuel not
having to, for the first time in Chicago history, being forced
despite the fact that President Obama was there.
It's shocking, but with his personality that he wasn't able to win that.
It's not his personality. It's the simple fact that he didn't take the time to understand the people who didn't look like him and didn't necessarily have the same money that he had. That is a direct reprimand in terms of his policies, the way he handled closing the schools, the way he's been handling the violence in Chicago. That's what that was about. That was not about anything else than you can't just say President Obama is my homeboy and then all the black people and minorities are going to show up on your side.
But can I ask you, the other thing that happened to Hillary Clinton this week is you had another story about the foreign donors to the Clinton Foundation. We now learn that some of those didn't even go through the vetting, at least from Algeria didn't go through the vetting, 500,000 at the State Department. The story looks bad.
Well, it stinks to high heaven. We'll see if the American media continues to follow this, probe it, as we see the beginning of right now. Saudi Arabia, other Middle Eastern governments, when she was Secretary of State, she seems to have skirted some of the rules during the time of her tenure as Secretary of State. Then she moved away from that. Now the donations, I guess, were coming in again from foreign entities. I always say, if this were a Republican, ... How would this ultimately play out? I think for her to be able to make this case of, I'm a new type of leader, I'm not exactly a carbon copy of Barack Obama, she has to portray herself as a little bit like Elizabeth Warren. I'm a champion of the middle class. I'm more of a populist Democrat.
And this week she also gave another $300,000 speech.
And Jonathan, the problem is it can't be words. It has to be actions, and that's the problem with these stories that come out because it all smells.